Imagine putting 100,000 people into a massive open-air stadium. You spent, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars on a live global broadcast.
Right, the stakes are just unimaginably high.
Exactly. The pyrotechnics are loaded, the cameras are rolling, and the entire world is watching. And then you basically just stand there helplessly.
Because your lead actor is legitimately knocked unconscious in 35 seconds flat.
Yeah, completely unscripting your multi-million-dollar finale. I mean, it is the ultimate producer's nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. Total, absolute loss of control.
Usually when we look at massive live events, the Super Bowl, a Broadway premiere, there's this comforting expectation of precision. The lights go down and the illusion is flawless.
But today, we're tearing down that illusion.
We really are. Welcome to this deep dive, and a very special welcome to you, our listener, the learner.
We know you thrive on unpacking how complex things actually work, so today we're making a massive pivot.
Yeah, usually we analyze monumental success stories. But today we are staring directly into the abyss of monumental failures. We're exploring the absolute worst moments in the history of WrestleMania.
And we aren't doing this just to point and laugh at a performer tripping over their own feet. I mean, that's easy.
Mm.
We are going to deconstruct the anatomy of these failures.
Right, the why.
Exactly. We're looking at the toxic backstage politics, the logistical production nightmares, and the profound miscalculations of audience psychology that turned surefire hits into absolute historical train wrecks.
Because the stakes here are astronomical.
Yeah.
Just to set the baseline for you, if you aren't steeped in this world, WrestleMania is the showcase of the immortals. It is the undisputed Super Bowl of sports entertainment.
It's the one night a year where the casual pop culture audience tunes in alongside the diehard fans, and because of that scale, well, the magnification of a mistake is terrifying.
Oh, 100%. A sloppy creative choice on a random Tuesday night broadcast, it's forgotten by Wednesday morning.
Right. But a bad creative choice at WrestleMania, it becomes a permanent scar on the company's legacy.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start in the late 1990s, the World Wrestling Federation's famous Attitude Era. Now, pop culture remembers this time with incredibly rose-tinted glasses.
They really do. They think of Stone Cold Steve Austin, the chaotic brawls, the record-breaking television ratings.
But if you dig into the historical retrospectives and backstage accounts from that era, WrestleMania 15, held in 1999, was an absolute masterclass in baffling, self-destructive decision-making.
It really was. The late 90s wrestling boom was driven by a philosophy of crash TV. The mandate was just constant, relentless shock value.
Faster pacing, more violence, less rules.
Exactly. But what the retrospectives show us is that when you push that philosophy to its absolute limit on your biggest stage, it ultimately cannibalizes the product.
And WrestleMania 15 is the purest distillation of that era's toxicity, starting with the catastrophic fallout of the Brawl for All.
Oh, wow, the Brawl for All.
Hold on, we have to set the table for this one because the premise alone is mind-boggling. The WWF, a company built entirely on scripted, choreographed athletic theater, decided to run a legitimate, unscripted shoot-fighting tournament on their television show.
They literally had their performers put on gloves and legitimately concuss each other.
Right. Why on earth would management introduce unscripted, real fighting into a fake fighting show? Weren't they terrified of exactly what ended up happening?
Well, you would think so, but you have to understand the 1990s locker room culture. There was this intense obsession with legitimate toughness.
Like proving who was actually the toughest guy in the back.
Exactly. The behind-the-scenes accounts indicate this entire unscripted tournament was essentially greenlit as a vanity vehicle for one specific wrestler named Dr. Death Steve Williams.
Right, because management, specifically Executive Jim Ross, loved Williams' legitimate collegiate wrestling background.
Yeah, they wanted him to steamroll through the roster in real fights so they could ultimately market him as an unstoppable monster to face their top star, Steve Austin.
Okay, so they essentially built an unscripted tournament, but just assumed their favorite guy would win because he was a tough guy.
Which is a huge assumption.
Right. But because they threw out the script, they threw out their own control. And an under-the-radar guy named Bart Gunn legitimately knocked Steve Williams unconscious.
Precisely. Bart Gunn was what the industry calls a mid-carder.
Let's define that for the learner, because that's not just a creative label,
Yeah.
right? That's a financial reality.
A mid-carder is the middle of the pack. They make significantly less money than the main eventers, they don't get a cut of the biggest merchandise sales, and they are generally viewed by management as, well, expendable supporting cast members.
They're there to make the top stars look good.
Exactly. So when a mid-carder literally knocks out the company's hand-picked million-dollar investment, it doesn't earn him a promotion, it earns him tremendous backstage resentment.
That is wild. That's like a boss firing you because you won the office raffle that they secretly rigged for the vice president.
That's a perfect analogy.
Instead of looking at Bart Gunn and saying, wow, this guy is a legitimate knockout artist,
Yeah.
let's put his face on a t-shirt and make millions. They viewed him as an embarrassing inconvenience.
They absolutely did. They pulled him off television for months to cool off his momentum, and then came the punishment. They booked Bart Gunn at WrestleMania 15 in a real unscripted boxing match against Butterbean.
Butterbean, the real-life, super heavyweight professional boxer.
Yes.
A man who looked like a human bowling ball and hit like a freight train.
Exactly. But here is the critical mechanical detail that turns this from a bad idea into actual corporate cruelty. Management expressly forbade Bart Gunn from using amateur wrestling takedowns.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, they told him Butterbean only agreed to the fight if it was strictly stand-up boxing. So the WWF took their own employee, threw him into a ring with a professional world-class knockout artist, and stripped him of his only defensive wrestling tactics.
He was a sitting duck.
Complete sitting duck.
And the result was terrifying. I mean, if you watch the tape, Butterbean knocks Bart Gunn out cold in 35 seconds.
It wasn't a fun theatrical wrestling finish.
No. Gunn's head snapped back violently, his eyes rolled back, and he was left unconscious, completely limp on the mat. The company sacrificed their own talent's brain cells to soothe their bruised egos, and they fired him shortly after.
It is a profound failure of promotional psychology. The entire business model of professional wrestling is building equity in your stars to draw money.
Right.
They allowed Bart Gunn to legitimately beat up half their roster over several months, only to have a guest star obliterate him in 30 seconds, immediately incinerating all the equity they accidentally built.
That destruction of Bart Gunn shows a company addicted to real violence.
Yeah.
But here's where we pivot to the flip side of that coin. What happens when you try to fake that extreme danger,
Right.
but you've pushed the envelope so far that the audience doesn't know what they're looking at anymore?
Right, which brings us to the Hell in a Cell match at that exact same WrestleMania.
The Undertaker versus the Big Boss Man.
Now, the Hell in a Cell is a giant roofed metal cage. It is designed to be the brutal, bloody conclusion to intense feuds. But this specific match was a slow, agonizing 9-minute slog.
It completely lacked the energy of a typical WrestleMania match. But honestly, no one remembers the match itself. They only remember the final 2 minutes.
Right. The ending.
The Undertaker literally wraps a noose around the Big Boss Man's neck, ties it to the roof of the cage, and as the cage mechanically raises into the rafters, the Boss Man is hoisted into the air,
Kicking his legs before going completely limp.
supposedly hung to death on live television.
From a purely mechanical standpoint, it's a fascinating piece of stagecraft.
Let's explain the physical mechanics of that, because obviously a man wasn't actually murdered on pay-per-view in front of 20,000 people. How do you rig a hanging in a brightly lit arena without the crowd seeing the trick?
Well, the secret was in the Big Boss Man's ring gear. He performed in a SWAT-style tactical flak jacket. Underneath that thick vest, he was wearing a heavy-duty stunt harness. Yeah, the noose that The Undertaker placed around his neck had a subtle, heavy-duty carabiner hook hidden near the knot.
So it wasn't just a regular rope.
Right. In the chaotic, dimly lit moments following the match, Undertaker slipped the noose over Bossman's head and quickly snapped that carabiner onto the hidden harness ring protruding just slightly from the back of the vest.
That makes sense.
So when the cage lifted, all of Bossman's body weight was supported by his chest and torso through the harness. There was zero actual pressure on his neck.
It's the exact same trick Hollywood stunt coordinators use. But just because it was physically safe doesn't mean it wasn't a creative disaster.
Oh, entirely.
If you listen to the audio of that moment, the crowd reaction is stunning. In an era where fans were rabid, screaming at absolutely everything, the arena goes entirely uncomfortably dead silent.
And that silence is the sound of a broken psychological contract with the audience. Wrestling fans operate on a willing suspension of disbelief.
They know it's choreographed.
Exactly, they know it, but they agree to treat it as real within the internal logic of the show. When you hang a man by his neck, you shatter that logic. The audience couldn't process it.
Are we supposed to cheer a murder? Is it real? Is it a stunt?
Right, and when Big Boss Man returned to television a few weeks later, completely fine, it rendered the entire stunt insulting to the audience's intelligence.
They confused offensive with edgy, and the production disasters at this event just snowballed. Because they were trying to fit so much chaos into a 3-hour window, the pacing fell apart.
Completely fell apart.
There was a women's championship match between Sable and Tori that was so incredibly rushed, Tori ended up taking an unprotected powerbomb directly onto her head and neck. It's a miracle she wasn't paralyzed.
It perfectly illustrates the crash TV mentality. Move so fast the audience doesn't have time to think. But when you move that fast in a live environment, the wheels fall off.
Yeah, we do.
And the ultimate casualty of that speed wasn't a wrestler, it was the broadcast itself.
Yes. The Michael Cole incident. This is honestly my favorite detail from this entire deep dive.
This is unbelievable.
Michael Cole, the play-by-play announcer, is sitting at ringside. The main event is about to start. The Rock defending his championship against Stone Cold Steve Austin.
The biggest match of the year.
Right. The cage is lowering, the tension is at its absolute peak, and Michael Cole, scrambling to read a hastily written promo script, tells the millions of people watching at home to tune into the Home Shopping Network right after the show to hear an exclusive interview with the, quote, new WWF champion.
He literally spoiled the climax of a year-long storyline before the opening bell even rang.
Just an unbelievable catastrophic error born from pure, unadulterated rushing. So you look at WrestleMania 15 and you see the profound danger of chaos. You see what happens when the inmates run the asylum.
Yeah.
But here's the brilliant irony that our research reveals. You would think the natural solution to this chaos would be to tighten the grip, right? To exert meticulous corporate control.
It's the logical pendulum swing.
But when WWE swung that pendulum completely in the opposite direction towards absolute corporate micromanagement, they didn't fix the problem. They just engineered a completely different genre of disaster.
If the late 90s were ruined by short-sighted shock value, the modern-era retrospectives point to events like WrestleMania 27 and WrestleMania 32 as victims of what we can call franchise cannibalization.
Franchise cannibalization. I like that term. What exactly does that mean here?
This is when a company sacrifices the present moment, the product people actually paid for today, entirely for the sake of future marketing.
Ah, okay. Let's dig into WrestleMania 27 in 2011. Fans online refer to this event as a 4-hour movie trailer.
Which is pretty accurate.
The main event was supposed to be the reigning champion, The Miz, defending against the company's biggest hero, John Cena. But the actual wrestlers were treated like background extras. The entire narrative focus was on the guest host, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
And the mechanical execution of that main event is just baffling. The match ends in a confusing double countout. The referee rings the bell, the match is over, nobody wins.
Anticlimactic.
Very. Then, The Rock walks out, abuses his power as the host to restart the match, and immediately attacks John Cena. This allows the villain, The Miz, to win.
But the broadcast doesn't end with the champion holding his title.
No, it ends with The Rock hitting his finishing moves on The Miz and standing tall as the screen fades to black.
They explicitly booked the climax of their biggest show of the year merely to set up a match between The Rock and John Cena for next year's WrestleMania.
Yeah, 365 days later.
Let me put this in perspective for the learner. Imagine paying $2,000 for flights, a hotel, and a front-row ticket to see the season finale of your favorite television show live.
Right.
But instead of a satisfying conclusion, the final 20 minutes is just a teaser trailer for Season 2. It's infuriating.
You're touching on the exact breach of trust. The promoter-audience contract requires a payoff. When the board of directors starts booking the show to appease shareholders with next year's projections, they actively cheat the people sitting in the building.
And this corporate disconnect trickled down to the entire pacing of WrestleMania 27.
The pacing was agonizing. Remember Michael Cole, the announcer who spoiled the main event years prior?
Oh, how could we forget?
Management decided he should have a prominent scripted wrestling match against fellow announcer Jerry Lawler. They gave two middle-aged men with earpieces 15 agonizing minutes of pay-per-view time.
15 minutes?
Yeah. Meanwhile, an actual generational wrestling talent like Daniel Bryan was completely bumped off the main card.
That is just insulting to the talent. And we also see the reality TV crossover here. Snooki from Jersey Shore was brought in for a tag team match.
Celebrity involvement is a WrestleMania staple, but the critical detail here is the hierarchy. The script called for Snooki to get the winning pinfall, while Trish Stratus, arguably the greatest female wrestler in the company's history, stood on the apron as a cheerleader.
Wow.
It signaled a corporate philosophy that valued fleeting mainstream tabloid press over the integrity of the full-time roster.
Which brings us to the zenith of that corporate arrogance, WrestleMania 32 in 2016. If 27 was a movie trailer, Historians categorize 32 as a literal war of attrition between management and the fans.
This is where we have to discuss the psychology of the smart fan era. Decades ago, fans cheered the heroes and booed the villains because that was the script.
It was simple.
Right. But with the rise of the internet, fans began to understand the backstage mechanics. They knew who the writers favored, they knew the contract statuses, and they understood the business.
They weren't just watching a show, they were analyzing the production of the show in real time. And going into WrestleMania 32, the WWE Executive Committee had decided that Roman Reigns was going to be the next heroic face of the global brand.
The problem, the smart fans actively, vehemently rejected him.
They rejected the corporate mandate. The main event was Roman Reigns against the villainous boss character, Triple H. On paper, it's classic storytelling, right? The blue-collar hero overcoming the corrupt executive.
But the fans in that massive stadium booed Roman Reigns relentlessly.
They booed him out of the building. And let's be clear, they weren't booing the character Roman Reigns. They were booing the invisible executive producer who was trying to force-feed them a hero they didn't organically choose.
Exactly. It creates a deeply uncomfortable viewing experience. When the crowd rebels, it shatters the immersion. A wrestling match requires a symbiotic energy between the ring and the audience.
Because the fans are part of the show.
Yes, entirely. When the crowd goes into business for themselves, essentially yelling, "We reject your script," the performers are paralyzed.
And WWE's response to this fan rebellion wasn't to pivot, it was to double down on hollow spectacles. The Rock showed up at this event too. He had an impromptu, unadvertised match against a massive, menacing villain named Eric Rowan.
Eric Rowan was a full-time performer. He was on the road 300 days a year, building his menacing persona. And how long did the match with The Rock last?
6 seconds. The bell rang, The Rock hit one move and pinned him.
Well,
6 seconds.
it's franchise cannibalization in miniature. WWE destroyed a full-time villain's credibility just so they could tweet out a social media clip the next morning saying, "The Rock sets new WrestleMania speed record."
Unbelievable.
They sacrificed a permanent piece of their foundation for a 24-hour dopamine hit of engagement.
Okay, so we look at the disasters of total chaos and the disasters of suffocating corporate control. But sometimes, as we see in our next stack of retrospectives, the balance is actually perfect.
Right.
The booking makes sense, the talent is prepped, the story is hot, and then reality violently crashes the script.
The intersection of real-world logistics and the insulated bubble of professional wrestling.
Now, before we look at WrestleMania 7, I want to set a clear parameter for the learner. We are about to discuss a storyline from 1991 that utilized highly charged geopolitical conflict.
Yes, the real-life Gulf War.
And we must explicitly state to you, the listener, that we are neutrally reporting the source material's account of this politically charged angle.
Entirely without endorsing any viewpoints.
Exactly. Strictly from a business, narrative, and logistical perspective, putting the actual real-world politics completely to the side. What is fascinating here is how a wrestling promotion attempted to exploit real-world anxieties for ticket sales, and how spectacularly they had to spin it when the public rejected it.
It's a textbook example of what we can call the carnival PR pivot. WrestleMania 7 was originally booked for the massive Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. We're talking a stadium that can hold over 100,000 people.
Massive venue.
The main event was Hulk Hogan, the ultimate American hero, defending his country's honor against Strite Slaughter.
But Strite Slaughter wasn't playing a cartoon villain. He was portraying an Iraqi sympathizer right in the middle of the actual Gulf War. The tagline on the posters was literally, "Superstars and Stripes Forever."
They thought leveraging real-time American anxieties would guarantee a sold-out stadium.
But then suddenly, weeks before the event, WWE announced a massive logistical shift. They were moving WrestleMania 7 from the 100,000-seat Coliseum to the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena.
An arena that was physically located right next door, but held fewer than 18,000 people.
Quite the downgrade.
The official company line, which they broadcast heavily on television, was that they were forced to change venues due to credible security threats and death threats directed at Sleating Slaughter.
They spun the venue change as a necessary heroic measure to protect the fans from potential terrorism.
But if you talk to the historians, industry analysts, and the former WWE producers quoted in our research, they paint a vastly different picture.
Yeah, the venue change wasn't driven by the FBI or bomb-sniffing dogs. It was driven by the accounting department.
Abysmal ticket sales. They had only managed to sell around 15,000 to 16,000 tickets.
Let's explain the sheer physical panic of that. If you put 16,000 people inside a coliseum built for 100,000, you have 84,000 empty seats.
It would look like a ghost town.
Exactly. On a global pay-per-view broadcast, the optics of an empty, cavernous stadium would make the company look completely bankrupt.
Which brings us to the carnival PR pivot. Professional wrestling promoters trace their lineage back at traveling carnivals, where the golden rule is to never, ever admit defeat and always protect the illusion.
Right.
Rather than admitting their controversial storyline had deeply alienated the public to the point where legendary mainstream broadcaster Bob Costas actually backed out of his hosting duties because he found the angle tasteless. They weaponized their own failure.
We aren't failing financially. Our villain is just so dangerously effective that the government made us move.
It is an astounding piece of public relations spin.
They took an 80% drop in projected revenue and tried to package it as narrative heat.
But reality doesn't just crash the script at the box office. Sometimes it crashes right in the middle of the ring. Let's look at the mechanical breakdowns, the botches. At WrestleMania 8, the main event featured Hulk Hogan against Psycho Sid.
And this match hinges on a concept called a protected move. Let's explain what that really means for the learner. A protected move isn't just a powerful attack, it's an unwritten financial contract with the audience. Right. For a decade, Hulk Hogan's finishing move, the running leg drop, was protected. When he hit it, the match was over. Period. No one kicked out of it. The company spent years conditioning the fans to trust that this visual signaled the end of the story.
Exactly. So the script for WrestleMania 8 dictates that Hogan hits the legendary leg drop on Psycho Sid. But to protect Sid from looking weak, another wrestler named Papa Shango is supposed to immediately sprint down the aisle, jump into the ring, and attack Hogan, causing a disqualification before the referee can count to 3.
But Papa Shango literally missed his cue. He was late running through the curtain.
So Hogan hits the move. The crowd goes wild. The referee dives to the mat. 1-2, and Sid is laying there realizing nobody's coming to save him.
If Sid stays down for 3, the match ends cleanly, and the entire post-match storyline they planned is ruined. So Sid has to awkwardly lift his shoulder and kick out of the most protected move in the industry.
It completely deflated the massive stadium crowd.
It's the live theater equivalent of an actor forgetting to walk on stage for the climactic duel, leaving the lead actor just staring at the wall, swinging his sword at empty air.
Missing a cue is a comedic failure of mechanics. But at WrestleMania 19, a mechanical failure nearly resulted in a live tragedy. Brock Lesnar, a 280-pound powerhouse, was in the main event against Kurt Angle. Lesnar attempted a top rope backflip, a move called the shooting star press.
A 280-pound man doing a backflip off a 10-foot pole. I mean, the physics alone are terrifying.
And the physics failed. Lesnar didn't get enough rotation. He didn't land on his opponent. He landed flush on the top of his own head.
If you look at the footage, his neck compresses like an accordion. The retrospectives note that trauma surgeons consider it a miracle they didn't snap his spinal cord or die instantly in the center of the ring.
He suffered a severe immediate concussion. But the deeply ingrained, somewhat terrifying instinct of the performer took over, and he actually managed to finish the scripted match while effectively unconscious.
It is a stark, sobering reminder that no matter how rehearsed the choreography is, the concrete under the mat is real. The physical danger is never an illusion.
And the very next year, at WrestleMania 20, Lesnar was involved in a completely different type of reality crash.
WrestleMania 20. Brock Lesnar was scheduled to wrestle Goldberg. On paper, this is a promoter's dream. 2 unstoppable, muscular titans colliding in Madison Square Garden.
But remember the smart fan era we discussed? In the weeks leading up to this match, the internet wrestling community uncovered a massive piece of backstage news. Both men were secretly leaving the company immediately following the match.
Ah, right.
Lesnar had decided he wanted to quit and try out for the NFL, and Goldberg's contract was expiring and he wasn't renewing.
The fans sitting in Madison Square Garden knew that neither man cared about the future of the company. So the fans decided not to care either. They mutated. They booed both men mercilessly from the second they walked through the curtain.
It's the Broadway metaphor again. Imagine sitting in a theater and you find out the 2 lead actors just trash talk the audience to the press that morning.
Yeah, the crowd collectively decides, you don't respect us. We are going to make the next 20 minutes of your lives a living nightmare.
And the performers had no idea how to handle it. They were completely paralyzed. They just stood in the center of the ring, staring out at 20,000 angry New Yorkers, realizing the script was entirely useless.
Because they couldn't play the hero or the villain because the crowd had rejected the very premise of the play.
It proves that in live entertainment, the audience always has the final veto power.
Okay, we've talked about the dangers of reality and angry crowds, but this next stack of retrospectives brings us to my personal favorite category. Moving away from literal danger or corporate malice, we have to acknowledge that sometimes management just vastly overestimates what the human palate will accept.
Oh, absolutely.
We're entering the realm of the bizarre, the comedic, and the just plain weird.
The category of gimmicks gone wrong. Wrestling relies heavily on colorful character work, but there is a razor-thin line between captivating theatricality and absolute baffling absurdity. WrestleMania 9 provides perhaps the most glaring example of crossing that line.
The Undertaker, who we now know from the Hell in a Cell hanging, was put into a match against a performer named Giant Gonzalez. Now, Gonzalez was legitimately 7 feet, 7 inches tall.
Huge man.
That visual alone is impressive enough to sell tickets.
Right.
But management looked at a 7'7" giant and decided, you know what he needs? A full-body, flesh-colored furry suit with giant airbrushed muscles drawn all over it.
The visual was completely jarring. He looked like a mythological yeti crossed with an anatomy textbook.
That's the perfect description.
But the in-ring mechanics were even worse. Gonzalez had virtually no athletic background or wrestling ability. He could barely move.
So you have this slow, agonizing, clumsy slog of a match. And how does it end? Not with a dramatic athletic maneuver. Gonzalez reaches into his furry suit, pulls out a rag soaked in chloroform, and smothers the Undertaker until he passes out, causing a disqualification.
Chloroform. It's like a trope ripped straight out of a 1940s detective radio serial, suddenly dropped into a live athletic contest.
It makes no sense.
It completely broke the internal logic of the sport. Why wouldn't every villain just bring chloroform to the ring?
Right. It's hilarious in hindsight, but baffling in execution. And this weirdness isn't confined to the early 90s. Fast forward a decade to WrestleMania 21 in Los Angeles. The 500-pound Big Show was booked in a legitimate sumo match against the real-life sumo grand champion, Akabono.
The pacing clash here is what makes it a disaster. Fans tune into WrestleMania expecting high-octane professional wrestling suplexes, dramatic near falls, ropes bouncing. Instead, they got a highly traditional, incredibly slow sumo bout.
They did the full salt-throwing ritual, the staring, and then the actual physical contact lasted barely a minute before Big Show was casually tossed out of the ring.
The live audience was completely silent. They weren't angry, they were just profoundly confused. It was a cultural and stylistic mismatch.
Management assumed that big men colliding was universal.
Right, failing to realize that the language of sumo doesn't translate to the expectations of a pro wrestling crowd.
And sometimes a gimmick crosses the line from baffling into deeply offensive. We have to look at WrestleMania 6 in 1990. Rowdy Roddy Piper wrestled Bad News Brown. And for reasons that defy any logical or creative explanation, Piper decided to paint exactly half of his body black for the match.
Viewing this purely through a historical and business lens, it is an incredibly jarring relic. Even by the looser standards of the early 90s, it was a massive miscalculation. It's a stark reminder of how tone-deaf the industry could be when it confused offensive provocation with compelling entertainment. The company recognizes this failure today. You will almost never see this match included in any historical highlight packages. They actively vault it.
It's the ultimate example of a bad idea making it all the way to the global stage without a single producer hitting the brakes. And then, returning to the modern era, we have a gimmick that divided the fan base right down the middle, WrestleMania 34.
Oh, this one.
Braun Strowman, who was booked as this massive, unstoppable monster, was scheduled to fight for the tag team championships. The storyline was that he didn't have a partner.
So the bell is about to ring, and Strowman needs a partner. He walks out of the ring, wades into the live crowd, and randomly selects a literal 10-year-old child named Nicholas.
A kid.
Yeah, he brings the child over the barricade, stands him on the ring apron, wrestles the entire match himself, and he and the child win the tag team championships.
A 10-year-old boy became a WrestleMania champion. Now, our sources show a massive divide on this. Some fans found it incredibly endearing. The ultimate Make-A-Wish style fulfillment for a kid in the crowd. A classic viral moment.
But if you look at the mechanics of the roster, wrestling purists viewed it as a destructive joke. It destroyed the credibility of the entire tag team division.
Because it makes everyone else look weak.
Exactly. If one monster and a 10-year-old child who literally does nothing can defeat your reigning veteran champions, it invalidates the skill and danger of every other tag team in the locker room.
It's the moment versus momentum debate. You get a cute photo op for one night, but you make your entire division look foolish for the rest of the year. It's fascinating. But, here is where this deep dive gets really interesting.
Let's hear it.
We spent all this time deconstructing the disasters that did happen. But I've got a final stack retrospectives here, and they detail the alternate history of WrestleMania. The near misses, the absolute train wrecks that were narrowly, miraculously avoided.
The butterfly effect of booking. These are arguably more compelling because they reveal just how precarious the creative process is behind closed doors.
So precarious.
A single changed mind, a rejected contract, or a stroke of dumb luck can literally save a multi-billion-dollar company from historic embarrassment.
Let's start with WrestleMania 23. This event was anchored by a massive crossover storyline called The Battle of the Billionaires, featuring WWE owner Vince McMahon against Donald Trump.
And again, strictly analyzing the theatrical casting and the creative booking of this television product, maintaining absolute political neutrality regarding the individuals involved, the creative mechanics of this match are fascinating.
Right. The premise was simple. McMahon and Trump would each pick a wrestler to represent them in the ring. The billionaire whose wrestler lost would have his head shaved bald live on pay-per-view.
High stakes for them.
Ultimately, Trump was represented by Bobby Lashley, a 270-pound powerhouse built like a Greek god. McMahon was represented by Umaga, a 350-pound destructive monster. It was a highly believable, heavy-hitting clash of heavyweights. But the original script, the backstage accounts reveal the original plan was for Donald Trump's representative to be Rey Mysterio.
Rey Mysterio is an undeniable industry legend. He is the ultimate high-flying underdog, but he wrestles in a lucha libre mask and weighs roughly 175 pounds.
Imagine the visual incongruity. You're trying to sell a clash of titan billionaires, and one of them chooses a small, acrobatic underdog to protect his hair against a 350-pound monster.
It would have completely robbed the match of its heavyweight gladiator appeal. The mainstream audience tuning in to see billionaires clash expects to see heavyweights collide.
Exactly.
Swapping the 175-pound Mysterio for the 270-pound Lashley at the 11th hour saved the match from feeling like a bizarre, unbelievable mismatch.
Thank goodness for that pivot. But speaking of pivots, let's talk about the absolute closest call in modern wrestling history. The mutiny that was narrowly averted at WrestleMania 30. We talked about the fans hijacking the Roman Reigns match, but this would have been 1,000 times worse.
Oh, without a doubt.
The original penned-in-stone script for WrestleMania 30 had the fan-favorite underdog, Daniel Bryan, wrestling in the middle of the card, completely excluded from the championship main event.
The main event was scheduled to be a returning veteran, Batista, against Randy Orton, and CM Punk was scheduled to wrestle executive Triple H.
But then real life intervenes. In January, just months before the show, CM Punk, who was severely burned out and physically exhausted, legitimately walked into the boss's office, quit the company on the spot, and went home.
That walkout created a massive gaping hole in the WrestleMania card. And simultaneously, the fans were engaged in an organic rebellion called the Yes Movement.
They desperately, feverishly wanted Daniel Bryan in the main event. They were already booing Batista out of every arena in the country.
The historians agree if CM Punk had not quit, WWE management was incredibly stubborn and would have stuck to their original script. They would have forced the Batista versus Orton main event down the fans' throats.
And the fans in New Orleans would have completely destroyed the show. It would have been the Lesnar and Goldberg mutiny on a monumental scale, a stadium of 70,000 people turning their backs and booing the climax of the biggest show of the year.
But because Punk's departure forced management into a panic, they had to pivot. They inserted Daniel Bryan into the main event to appease the crowd and inadvertently created one of the greatest, most emotionally satisfying conclusions in WrestleMania history.
They avoided an apocalyptic disaster purely because an exhausted employee unexpectedly breached his contract.
It proves that sometimes the company's greatest creative victories are actually just frantic corrections to their own terrible ideas.
And finally, let's look at a disaster averted not by luck, but by the integrity of the performers themselves. WrestleMania 25. Management wanted to do something special to honor the women's division. They pitched a 19-woman battle royal.
They reached out to legendary, retired women's wrestlers icons who built the foundation of the division, like Trish Stratus and Lita, asking them to return for this massive showcase.
On paper, a beautiful tribute, bringing generations together. But the critical mechanical detail of wrestling is the predetermined outcome. The script dictated that the winner of this match, the last quote-unquote woman standing, would be Santina Marella.
Yes.
Wait, explain who that is for the learner.
Santina Marella was a male mid-card comedy wrestler. The script called for him to dress in drag, enter the women's battle royal, and throw the female legends over the top rope to win.
Can you imagine the sheer disrespect? Asking the most respected women in the history of your company to come out of retirement, train, travel, and step back into the ring, purely to serve as the punchline for a cross-dressing comedy gag.
When Trish Stratus and Lita were informed of the finish, they wisely and immediately declined the invitation.
By simply saying no, those legends saved the WWE from a PR nightmare. It would have been an all-time low for the perception of women's wrestling, completely undercutting years of athletic progress for a cheap laugh.
These near misses perfectly illustrate the high-wire act we talked about at the beginning. Booking a live, athletic, narrative spectacle relies on so many volatile moving parts, fragile egos, unpredictable audience reactions, physical health, and sheer luck.
Yeah, when you realize how easily a masterpiece can shatter into a disaster, you appreciate the successes on a much deeper level.
Exactly.
So what a journey we've taken today. We started with the brutal reality of an unscripted 35-second knockout, and we watched a man hang from a metal roof in front of 20,000 silent fans.
We dissected the franchise cannibalization that alienated paying audiences.
And we watched the Carnival PR pivot try to spin empty seats into patriotic fervor.
And if we synthesize all of this, the learner has to ask, what is the ultimate takeaway? Why does studying these failures matter?
That's a great question.
Because this catalog of catastrophes provides a profound masterclass in audience psychology and structural integrity. It highlights the severe, lasting damage of prioritizing short-term shock over long-term logical mechanics.
Right.
It reveals that no matter how big a corporation gets, even a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut with unlimited resources, if they stop listening to the organic feedback of their consumers, they will fail spectacularly. They are vulnerable to bad ideas, bruised egos, and the chaotic, violent intervention of reality.
It brings us right back to our very first thought. That illusion of the perfectly tuned engine is a myth. Live entertainment is a high-wire act, and the wind is always blowing.
It always is.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as we sign off. Think about the actual nature of the spectacle you enjoy, especially the human element. If an event like WrestleMania was flawlessly executed every single year, engineered with absolute sterile perfection without a single weird creative choice, blown physical cue, or chaotic backstage drama leaking out, would it actually still be as captivating?
A really interesting point.
Think about it. The humanity of the performers is what makes it real. Sometimes it is the constant looming threat of spectacular failure that proves just how incredibly difficult the magic is to pull off in the first place. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the spectacle, keep looking behind the